Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in the second of our webinar series today, second of our public webinar series for 2024, where our plan is to share insights and some best practices and some strategies for navigating key elements of leadership and management, no matter what your current role, whether you're in the HR space, in the space of leading of teams, or as a team member, key team member, and or whether you are a manager and a coordinator of people. So we're going to touch on many different facets of navigating change and change management, and it'll give you some insight into incorporating the select content that we have from many of our PD programs that we're incorporating within today. So today we're going to be looking at, our focus is on navigating change. And when we consider this navigating change, a couple of elements we want to bring in. And first, let me introduce myself. I haven't done that. My name's Greig Ward. I'm the Learning and Content Manager at Marketing Sales Group. While we're based here in Richmond, in Melbourne, we liaise and work with and have clients throughout Australia, New Zealand, Asia, and many of our members are now in Europe as well. So we've got a bit of a far reach there, and today's webinar, of course, will be made available to those people who couldn't join us as well, which allows us to cross those borders. So in today, what we're going to look at navigating change, a couple of questions probably to trigger and get you thinking. Firstly is, what has changed for you recently? And what has changed around you? What have you changed? So what have you changed? And what has been changed around you? Was it planned or unplanned? And was it welcome or unwelcome? And all these variables come into change and how we navigate it, and as leaders and managers, how we help other people bring any change initiatives through to fruition. So what we're going to look at today, the focus for today is, we're going to look at what change management is, a quick overview of it and a recap for many of us, why we need to understand it, and probably an element at the personal level to understand the psychology of change, as well as the personal psychology, as well as a bit of the organisational psychology behind it, why some change initiatives fail, and probably most importantly, what are some models that allow us to support our team members and support the organisation as they go through these change initiatives. So firstly, as we look at the elements of change management, so individually and as a business or as a team, there's constant evolution, adaptation required in the marketplace. And we find that with our clients constantly. They're adjusting to market pressures, they're adjusting to new technology, they're making changes because of new laws or regulations. The marketplace might have diversified and changed. So as a result, we need to be able to manage this change, otherwise we'll be subjected to it. So we need to be in control of it rather than it controlling us as much as possible. So this process is going to assist individuals and organisations there. And if and when we implement, and what we found is people who effectively implement change management strategies and navigate change management well, they increase the chance of the initiative reaching fruition, because as we'll find out shortly, they don't all make it through to fruition, all these change initiatives. Organisational change, before we look at the personal level and the team level and the company level, we often refer to this as structural change. It's a common term we use, that is the structural change. And it's the actions that a business will use to alter or adjust some component of how it's organised. We sometimes see a reshuffling of the cabinet, we might see in the politics, or we might see some companies go to a flatter or less hierarchical structure. That's an organisational change. And they're usually intended, and ideally they're planned. They can be unintended and unplanned, but they're usually ineffective at that point. When we look at a failure to adopt or adapt to change, and if we don't modify, we can end up, as we quick shot here, we can end up with this stagnation. And one of the challenges of not changing. So when we look at what it is and what happens if we don't adopt it or get effective at change management, what we find is companies will stagnate. If they stagnate, the next step most likely is complacency, or they become complacent, and then stagnation tends to occur. And we get what a lot of us refer to as the sea of mediocrity, where people end up just going through the motions. And sometimes staff even have that terminology, just go modes. They're going through the motions. And in going through the motions, this stagnation, or we become less competitive in the marketplace, or heaven forbid it, we even become obsolete. Examples of large organisations we've seen with this before would most likely be in the space of Borders bookstore, not adapting to the digital marketplace and the advent of Kindles and reading online. Kodak, who was so heavily reliant on film processing, and when the advent of digitalisation in photography took place, they become less significant and more obsolete and didn't adapt accordingly. Blockbuster, probably one of the more famed discussions there. And when we have the CEO at the time, Jim Keyes, was looking at a potential merger with Netflix, but one of the reasons they couldn't merge is because they were so heavily in debt at the time and they had to write off a lot of their debt. And that was one of their big challenges. But they didn't adapt to the marketplace in the time that Netflix was able to. And now here we are all talking more about Netflix than we are about Blockbuster. So the alternative to innovation can be stagnation, mediocrity, lack of competitiveness in the marketplace, becoming obsolete. So some recent change initiatives, so we don't just look at what change on a large scale, because I know some of the audience today will look at it at a smaller scale or on a team level or a small to medium enterprise level. So as we look at some of these change initiatives, it can present as either personal, it can present as a team, it can present as organisational, we can have environmental change, we can have marketplace change, we can have economical change. And so some of these examples might be, you may be familiar with venues that had gone purely cashless. So I was fortunate enough to be at the Adelaide test many years ago when they decided to bring in just a cashless society. You had to buy your own little credit card or use your EFTPOS card all around Adelaide Oval. Here in Australia, the same thing now, large venues like the MCG, a lot of large sporting organisations, music venues, some shops, stores are now only accepting that. So how do we adapt to that? As an individual, carry less cash, not a big issue, but as a venue as well. Remote and hybrid working is probably the largest change we've had organisationally, personally, teams, and how we adapted to that. Some companies have done it extremely well. Some are still navigating it because it is very early days if we look at it in the history of working. Professional collaboration, we used to attend conferences, quite regularly face-to-face. Now a lot of them are done online. We're meeting, we're attending webinars, we're watching on demand if we want, and just doing it in the luxury of our own homes. So the change in how we learn has taken place. Purchasing of holidays, coaching, professional development, and then, of course, the change to the world of apps. If we haven't got one, there'll be one created for it. So these are initiatives that are taken place and will continue to evolve. Do we evolve with them, or do we end up being pushed to the outside and be seen as we become partially obsolete, I might say? So what happens with the psychology of change? So it's important with a lot of coaching we do and a lot of the programs we run is helping people understand the principles before we understand the practices. So what's sort of lying underneath and what might trigger the responses that we usually see in our staff members or our team members or in the company when it knee-jerk reacts. So what can happen within change there? Sometimes just the mention of change can trigger anxiety by itself. And so people think we're going to change things. We're changing address, we're changing office, we're changing the way we do things. That in itself can lead to adverse reactions in the individual. It often links back to poorly managed change historically. So we have what's called a propensity for change. That is historically, what's our relationship with change? Are we comfortable with it, or do we have a terrible relationship with it? And because of it, if it's been managed poorly in the past, people will be left unhappy or frustrated or disappointed historically, and they'll sometimes carry that with them, almost like baggage. So this is what can happen. Change can trigger a threat response. So we'll see in a moment that some people see change as an opportunity and some people see it as a threat. If we see it as a threat, it triggers a distress response in us. If we see it as an opportunity, it triggers a eustress response, which is a positive stressful response. So it depends on our perspective of it, and our perspective changes a lot with our history of it before. Some people will tend to focus more on what's lost than what's gained. And this is one of the earliest change management strategies, and helping people navigate change was helping to look at what's going to change for the better and not what they're letting go of. There is a need to let go of some of it. We'll look at a bridging model in a moment, one of the models where we do look at letting go of one methodology before we embrace the next one. Another element we have is we have this tendency, and it's by, if you're familiar, not something you might be familiar with, the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is headed up by a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Rock, who's an Australian who now lives in New York and heads up, leads a company that leads with a brain in mind. And he talks about change being one of those things that threatens our state. So our desire for certainty, for stability, and for safety. And if we feel that's going to be challenged at some point, it can bring us back to that threat state, which is in behaviorally an away state. So we will move away from it because it's a threat. We won't embrace threats typically. And fourthly, as I mentioned earlier, our personality. So our personality, some people just have this need for change, and we'll probably all know someone who loves change, loves variety, loves mixing things up, while there's others who prefer to keep things as they are, not to change too much. And that's just their preference. So it can be influenced by our preference and prior experiences with change. We know through research that people that have moved house or changed job quite regularly are more comfortable with doing the same thing in the future. So people that have moved house, especially in their youth, if their parents were moving quite a bit, sometimes it might be in the military, or it might have been in the banking and finance sector, which was quite common going back some 20 plus years ago. If people grew up in that environment where they changed quite often, changing again isn't a huge thing to them. They may be over it, we might say, but they usually don't have a great aversion to it, as those people who haven't experienced change historically. So all these factors can influence people's propensity or their embracing of change or the reluctance, desire to change, which will affect us as the managers of initiating change. You may be familiar with this diagram here. It's a Chinese calligraphy. It's meant to represent change in their language. So it's been used in many a change program before, and it reminds us that there's not just one way of looking at change. There's two characters in this instance. The character on the left says caution. The character on the right suggests opportunity. And together it represents change. And it's a reminder for us that as we look at change, and Jim Keyes, who is the CEO also of 7-Eleven in its grandiose days of when it boomed throughout the world, actually uses the term CEO. We know it as the chief executive officer, or so blank, that chief executive officer. He says it's change equals opportunity. He's a person who embraces change and drove change through large organizations and multi-billion-dollar organizations, and he's a huge advocate of just this model. Beware of when we're changing, so there's caution associated with it, but there's also opportunity. So sometimes we need to, yes, things are different. We might have moved house, okay, it's a different street. Be careful of this here. We don't live in a court anymore. There is more traffic, caution, opportunity. Oh, it's got a nicer park, it's a nicer suburb. In the work environment, caution, we've changed the process. It's not exactly the same. Opportunity, it's more streamlined, however. There is less documents, there's less protocol. So look at both halves of it, and so we start understanding the perspective associated with it. Why change initiatives fail? So where do we sometimes get it wrong? And I mentioned in the introduction, not all change initiatives go through to fruition. And so Forbes' recent research identified that as many as 57% of change initiatives don't make it through to fruition. And remember, there's a lot of change initiatives being pushed through a lot of companies. A lot of the times people do it in their personal lives as well, and they just aren't always successful. So understanding why they're not successful is super important for us. So one of them for us as managers and leaders is extremely important, clarifying that there needs to be a clear reason for the change. If there isn't a clear reason for the change, a big why, then team members and employees are less likely to adopt it and less likely to embrace the change. Secondly, can be poorly communicated. Like, when did that change? Who changed that? I didn't know about that. Was there a memo? I never received an email. So there may have been some changes, but the change was poorly communicated. The third one, there can be a group or an individual reluctance to let go. And I'd be surprised if all of us hadn't experienced this some stage. Oh, it was so good when, and we might hear our parents or parents-in-law talking about the good old days. Wasn't it great when? This reluctance to let go of something and move on to something new. And that can happen, and it can create a bit of a groupthink as well if it becomes too collective. And the fourth one, again, is a bit of behavioural psych, and that new habits and new routines do take time and effort to embed. And that's an important part of change management and navigating change, that it won't be instantaneous, especially if it involves more people. The more people, there'll be more moving parts. And the more moving parts requires more time and more consideration. So there's just a lot more variables. So they're key reasons why change initiatives tend to fail. So how can we assist it? How can we help guide change initiatives within the corporate level or at a team level or an individual level? So at a personal level, we can, as we identified before, we can start looking at what are their actual fears or the concerns. And we'll look at a model called ADCAR shortly, which is change at a personal level, helping someone navigate change at a personal level rather than organisational level or process level. So what are the fears or concerns from the individuals and or the group, and can we address them and where possible minimise them? Can we provide the necessary support for the change? We'll often have an instance where people want to make the change and a change is necessary and the change can be brought on, but there isn't the support to do it. So there's an example with, some of you might be familiar with hot cross buns being sold through a lot of our supermarkets throughout Australia. They start very early now. And the company called Bread Solutions won the contract, going back some years ago, they won the contract to supply the hot cross buns at all Coles supermarkets. It was won over, and it was an amazing win for the business development manager who scored the win. The challenge was he then had to go back and explain to all the staff that they're going to have to make more hot cross buns. We're talking hundreds or thousands and thousands of dozens hot cross buns. And at the time, the head baker, well, let's call him that to be fair, was saying, we'll need a new machine. We'll need new machines. So he couldn't do it without all the equipment necessary. So to purchase that will be to support the staff. To not do that would be asking them to extra mile and do something would probably bordering on the impossible. Thirdly, open communication channels. Having these communication channels open and clarity, transparency is huge now as we move forward beyond 2020. Transparency is probably number one sought out trait or an expectation of team members and employees. That things are clearly communicated and they can see how they're tracking. Fourthly, what are the benefits of changing? So what's in it for me? We always have to think, everyone tunes into that station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for us? What's in it for the team? So what are the benefits of change at an organisational, at a company, and an individual level? And finally, and ideally this would take place much earlier, of course, is a clear roadmap, how this is going to take place. And by when, having some benchmarks, the support structures that are going to be in place, might be launched, when the launch date might be, if it's a new product or a new initiative. So we'll look at the two models shortly with ADCAR and Kubler-Ross at an individual level, how we can assist people through change. We'll share those with you. Prior to that, I want to share a fantastic model by a woman called Jenny Jones, who's a bit of a change management guru, I might even say. What she's identified, she shares this formula with us, and the formula says, well, how adaptable, how well we change will have, at an individual level, have a lot to do with how adaptable we are. And our adaptability is driven by a number of things. So above the denominator, which is threat, as we'll shortly see, we have the purpose, inquisitiveness, and resilience. Below is the level of threat and how we perceive the threat. So in terms of purpose, This is the why. The greater the why, the stronger the purpose. Right? The stronger the purpose, the increase the P level in this instance there. So the purpose or the why guides us. The inquisitiveness is the growth mindset, the willingness to change, to adopt, to try new things, and continually learn and continually develop. Some people and some companies are wired for this, others less so. And thirdly is our resilience. And our resilience is largely our ability to sort of bounce back from obstacles or setbacks that have been put in our way, and our ability to negotiate and navigate through those. So can we learn from those? So if we can increase our purpose, increase our inquisitiveness, and increase our resilience, we can increase our adaptability. However, it's the denominator, as we can see here, is the threat, and that's our perception of the change. Do we see the change as a big threat to us? If we see it as a large threat, then our adaptability is not going to be so great, because the threat numerator, or the denominator in this instance, is much greater. So what we want to be doing is building our purpose, help people understand the why for the change, and for us as individuals. Be curious about the change and the benefits of a growth mindset. Right? Be open to new ideas and willing to embrace them, and willing maybe to let go of old ways. And thirdly, to be resilient. We're not expecting things to go well all the time. Right? We'll talk about iteration and reiteration and reiteration and reiteration, which is constantly happening in the world of, say, software, or in design, or in people that are doing innovations or inventions, what we might used to call inventions. They're constantly bouncing back when something doesn't work, and then seeing that this isn't such a large threat. So this impersonal. So we're going to look at these models now. I want to share with you, I'm going to share with you 6 models for change management. And I'm going to go through these steadily. Some relate to the process. So the first 3 are linked to the process of change. So the change and the process. And then the next 3, will relate to people focus. Right, so we're going to look at Kotter's 8-step model, Lewin's change model, and Deming's cycle, continuous improvement. And they're more process-oriented. Yes, they incorporate people, but they're process-oriented. And the next ones are looking at the ADKAR model of change, Bridges transition model, probably one of the more simpler ones to understand, and the change curve, which some of us might know as the Greig curve sometimes. It gets incorporated within that. So Kotter's 8-step model, we can see here, starts at the bottom here, looking from helping create the climate for change, so helping set up for success in this instance. Then there's the engaging and enabling of the individuals within the organisation, and then implementing the change within it. So there's a number of steps throughout it there. And when we have this creating an urgency is identifying and explaining the reasons for the change. A powerful coalition, getting a team behind it rather than just one person trying to make the change. The vision, how it will look at the other end. What will the change look like? Being able to communicate that vision. You may have the vision as the leader, but can we communicate that effectively? Empowering others to be able to take action and the change they're required to do. And seeing small wins along the way is fantastic, given where we get those. Once we get those small wins, building on them and then making it stick so it becomes what we call the new norm. Now, with all models, there's usually an upside and a downside to them. The upside of the Kotter's 8-step model is that it's process-driven and it's quite methodical. That's the upside of it. The downside, if there is one, it can't be used for critical incident change because it's not an immediate change. It's a slower process and it takes time to draw it out. So if you have something like trying to rebound from a cyber attack or being hacked in your organization, it's probably not going to be able to help you there and then, right? It will in the long term, but not in the immediacy. So model number 1. Sorry. Second one we call Lewin's change management model. And as the diagram suggests here, you've got 3 phases. You've got the unfreeze, the change, and then the refreeze. So in unfreezing, what we're looking at is we're removing the status quo. So this is where we sort of overcome existing mindsets, overcome existing attitudes, We also have our preferences and our biases, and we need to understand when they help us and when they hinder us. So this is the unfreezing component of it. And what it says here, removing the status quo, the way things were. The change is the transition phase. This is the transformative stage when we'll be going through all the necessary steps. And then the refreeze, which is sustaining the new status quo. This is where you create and embed the new norms. This is the new way we're going to be seen. So companies go through this sometimes just with simple, I won't say simple, but for brand change, when they change their brand, when they're changing their logos. You might all be familiar with Microsoft. The CEO, Satya Nadella, changed Microsoft's leadership methodology from being a know-it-all organization to a learn-it-all organization. And that was a huge shift. And it took an approach a lot of ego that was within the organization. For us in Victoria, although some people in Queensland, you might be familiar with the RACB and the RACQ, who we just used to know as roadside assistance. Well, here, at least in Victoria, they also do resorts. Yeah, they've got about 4 or 5 resorts now. So they want to be known for other things. Coles have had to rebrand, not just as a supermarket change, but then they've got their Coles Express, they've got Coles Insurance. So this is changing the way we're doing things. We're not seen just as the one. So there's a slight unfreezing and sometimes a bit of a thaw, and then a refreeze or morphing into what we're going to be doing here. So we're perceived differently. The Deming cycle. As a teacher by profession, which is my profession to kick me off in my career, we used to refer to this as plan, do, study, act. The check and the study can be interpreted for the same thing. The plan, do, study, act is a simplistic form for phase model, where we look and it's continuous improvement. Plan what we're going to do, we do it, we check how it went, what worked, what didn't, act on that and build that into the next plan. So it's what we call an iteration and a reiteration model. Athletes use this all the time for tweaking performance. Inventors and creators use this all the time for tweaking their performance or tweaking their products. Software engineers use this all the time to reconfigure or launching of a new update. They've got to check it, dry run it first, plan, do, study, or plan, do, check, act, PDCA. And it's a loop that goes round, named after Edward Deming, bit of a guru in the process world. Very responsible that supported Toyota in their initial change. Now we move into the people focus. People focus, people change models. ADCAR, I referred to earlier, we use this in a few of our coaching programs for coaching leadership and management, making people aware of the change. So why do we need this change? Making them aware that may be coming. Forewarned is forearmed. A desire, building some desire for them to participate in the change. So we need some cheerleaders in there. Some people are going to support us throughout the program. Equipping them with the knowledge to be able to change. Do they know how to change? And with that knowledge comes the ability, which we might call the skill sets and the behaviours to change. A lot of people might be aware of the need to change and know they've got to change, but might not have the necessary skills and behaviours to be able to do that. And new policies and procedures or processes might be need to build in, and we might need to coach those in. And then the most important part of this, once we've started this change, is to reinforce it. It's a case of inspect what you expect. If we want the change, we really need to be there with our finger on the pulse to see that. Is it being reinforced? It's coming from the wall to the floor, as we say in changing culture, not just putting the words on the wall, but putting those words on the floor, and so we're walking the talk. So the ADCAR model really hones in on the individual. The Bridges transition model, our 5th of our 6 models we're going to look at today in our flash look at navigating change. We look at productivity on the left and time on the right. As I said, it's more a simplistic model, but it reminds us we've got these endings of one and we're going into a new beginning, but there's going to be a transition zone in the middle. I'm not sure if anyone's in the retail space, but this happens a lot in fashion and design when we have a change of seasons. So companies will let go of one line of products. So now it's the tail end of summer in Australia. So they might be letting go of the summer products and starting to introduce their autumn and their winter editions, if there is such a thing, says me, the fashion guru. But we're letting go of one thing So there is going to be an end. Communicate the end, though. It's not a sudden thing. People need to know there's an ending to something, which is why we often see sales on in the retail world. The neutral point, and productivity is often down because we haven't got this new line yet. It's not operating, the new beginning, the new way of doing something isn't in yet. So there will be, and most often, a dip in productivity. There are models for overlapping, but they're usually not as effective because it requires another team to be working in conjunction with the team, one team letting go and one team implementing the new. So they overlap. So we call this the bridges transition model there. And the model a lot of us may be familiar with, as I said, it's sometimes associated with grief. Strange analogy, but grief is one of the greatest changes we'll go through, especially in loss. So we look at the Kubler-Ross change curve. The added advantage I love about this model is we have the state that we might be in, the reaction of the individual at this point, and then how us as leaders and managers can approach that and guide and assist people through and support them through the changes that are going on. So in this instance, we've got there's going to be some sort of, as I said, you've got insight into how the individual feels, right? So the status quo, things are okay, but there'll be shock and denial. So performance won't be changing yet but there will be shock. We need to communicate what's going on. During this frustration and depression phase, there will be disruption. And we get angst and anxiety comes in here. We can get fear, we can get anger kicking in as well. We need to be highly supportive in this instance here. The fact that we know that some people will go through this phase should forewarn us in some regards. And even though we can't pretend to be the career counsellors, we can't pretend to be the person who can guide everyone through it, knowing in advance we should be able to assist our team members and provide the support. Key caveat with this model too is different people go through different phases over different periods of time. Some people spend more time in more of some of the phases, and that can be to do with cultural differences as well. So we can't expect everyone to flow through this evenly. So this is where diversity of teams need to be understood. There's strengths to diversity of teams, but there can be challenges because different people perceive the change as different for each of them. As they come out the other side, when I say the other side through the depressive side of this, what we used to call the grief curve, we're now experimenting decision-making and integration of the new norm. And this new norm allows us to explore, trial it, and commit to the new change. And ideally, if it's in a change management scenario in business, celebrate the change and enjoy these wins. So there's some insight to 6 of the models that we use in change management. Some are more relevant for different situations, different size companies going through different types of change. We use some of these within our programs, explaining and assisting companies who are going through changes, whether they're organisational, whether at the team level, whether it's product change, whether it's change of venue. Sometimes we get involved with people that are changing office, helping them rebuild the collegiality and the camaraderie with the team when they've just come back into the workplace, after having a period of time of working away. Each of these helps us, as I was saying before, helps us understand how to navigate change, the psychology behind it, what to monitor and avoid, and some models to help us navigate it. So there, within a quick 33 minutes, team, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. What we have coming up with our next, if you have any questions, of course, please shoot them through. And Jenny, we have Jenny in the background fielding for questions there. We have one of these one of these webinars every month now. Our next webinar is 3rd of April, and it's on leadership, making great leaders. And then in May, we're looking at teamwork. June, we've got time and task management. And July is storytelling and presentation skills, as I look at my notes on the side here. Be sure to register your interest. You can do that on our website as well. And the recording will be available for each of these, and they'll be available on our website. So I can't see any questions, everyone. So thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your involvement and your investment of time today. And I look forward to catching you, hopefully, in a future webinar. And feel free to reach out about more of our programs, whether they be in the sales or in the leadership component, our Train the Trainer, which is called the Modern Coach, our Developing Manager program, or our Customer Service Excellence program, or a hybrid of any of all those, which a lot of people seem to finding a fit for now. thanks very much again. And it's been an awesome time to have you here. Thank you.